Hello, I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that. Now, I have made a number of attempts to record the entirety of the deep dive into artillery. Needless to say, there's so much going on in artillery that we ain't going to do it in a single video. So, this video, we're going to be focusing on the Martier artillery. And as always, we'll look at the tech, we'll look at the unit, we'll look at some officer pairings and some scenarios. So if you miss one of these episodes, it's not a big deal because we will be covering the tech at the start of every episode like we always do, and the tech is pretty much going to be the same. Now, before we continue with the tech, it is going to be worth noting that we'll only be looking at the tech relevant to the individual unit. Let's begin. Automatic loading devices. When there are no enemies within 2 map grids of the howitzer, firepower is increased by 5%. And, of course, God of War. When your artillery attacks, there is a 10% chance the load time will be reduced by 40%. Now, it is worth noting we're only going to be looking at the advanced section, as most players are in silver. I myself play in silver by choice, and there's little point in us going into the modern tree as a result. So, for the time being, all of the videos focus on the advanced tech tree. We will look at a couple of other techs that are in this tree, and as always, keep the tech in your mind going forwards when we're looking at the unit. So ones that are worth noting is a troop damage intensity, which will come in very handy specifically for this artillery. Load time reduction, which for this artillery piece is going to be needed. Movement speed is nice if you're playing in the field. Damage intensity versus tanks. Damage intensity versus artillery. And damage intensity versus infantry. And last but not least, a bonus to firepower. Now, these are all worth looking at, and they're all worth maxing out if you have the Martier infantry, and as always we want to keep that in mind going forwards. Now normally this is where I go into the journal and we look specifically at the unit, but before we jump into the journal, the reason why this video and these videos are taking so long is because of the next thing I want to go over. Now, I've shown these pages before. These are the attribute pages for the units, and this is the Martyr artillery. What we're interested in here is where it says fortification damage multiplier of 250%. Now, each one of these artillery pieces have a different bonus, which is where things started getting very complicated in the big deep dive. So as a result, what we're doing is we're doing 4 smaller ones, because no one wants to sit through a 2-hour lecture by me, least of all me, because I have to watch it back when I do the recording. So as always, we're interested in this little tiny brown bar, and for the Martier howitzers, we've got some things to cover. Siege, capable of dealing huge damage to fortifications. Enhanced blast damage deals blast damage to all visible units within the same map grid, regardless of whether their direct attack hits the target. Modern howitzers deal 50% more blast damage. We'll get into that in a second. Enhanced firepower is the camp bonus and has higher firepower than other howitzers from other camps. So, as you can see, we get a 1.5 million firepower bonus. Now, This is still the slowest loading artillery gun. Not artillery piece, but artillery gun. So, compared to the other artillery pieces, this is only one up from the bottom in damage to fortifications. So the ATG is obviously at the bottom of that pile, then it's this one, then the lib gun, and then it is the RL, although those two are tied for the top spot depending on the officer and setup you are using, and depending on the type of fortification you are attacking. But back to enhanced blast damage. So a lot of people don't understand what blast damage is, and blast damage is all of the visible units within a map grid that get hit with an artillery shell or an explosive type ammunition, whether that be from a bomb from a bomber or whether that be from an artillery shell. That counts as a blast damage. It has a blast radius, which means one unit is targeted with, you've got 6 units in, say, the map grid that are visible, each with little multipliers underneath indicating how many reserves there are for replacing them once they've been destroyed. And say you fire 3 shots into those 6 that are visible, you're probably going to hit 2 of them, 1 might miss, all 3 might hit. But with blast damage, the main unit takes a hit and then you get a trickle effect in damage to the next target. So it's a spillover effect onto the next target. And this is important because it's a very good way of eliminating things like helicopters. It's a great way of eliminating MBTs. It's a great way of eliminating other artillery pieces. It's not so great when it comes up against infantry and fortifications. The reason being is once infantry are in a bunker mode, the splash damage, there's only one visible unit and it is the bunker. And this has the lowest of the 3 fortification bonuses that are applied. Obviously there is no fortification bonus applied to the ATG, but out of the RL, the lib gun and the Marty gun, this one is actually the one on the bottom. So, how could we use this artillery piece? Well, you're getting a 50% better blast. It is going to be a slow firing unit. However, as always, we've got to remember the tech. We're getting a reduced load time from God of War. 1 in 10 shots will reduce the load time by 40%. And also we're getting additional firepower and we're getting damage intensity. Why is damage intensity important? Well, mostly this is a defensive gun, if I'm perfectly honest. The fortification bonuses that you get for this artillery piece are so low that's why you see a lot of larger players using the Liberty gun over this. Don't get me wrong, this is still going to hurt with its coefficiency damage, its skill damage. It's going to be astronomically high, but the actual gun itself versus a base or versus a bunker isn't going to deal a lot of damage compared to the Liberty gun. So it's a trade-off. If you deal 70k in damage out in the field with both guns, then the fortification bonus comes into play and you're going to be dealing more with the Liberty gun than you are with the howitzer from the Marty camp. Is it the best gun out of the 2 artillery howitzers? Again, it depends on how you're deciding to play. If you're playing more defensively, then it may be the case, but also you're going to lose out on the flexibility that is provided by the Liberty gun. So is the Liberty gun better? Not necessarily the case. It's not a straightforward question. It's more of one of those questions that it is down to how you play and how you want to play. The Liberty gun's going to be better at clearing bunkers because of the fortification bonus, but this is going to be better at clearing helicopters because of the higher attack power. The skill damage is going to be higher, and also we're getting enhanced blast damage. which is applicable to both howitzers. This isn't just a Marty piece, but it is applicable to both. So with this gun being more focused to dealing blast damage towards units, because it's got a higher firepower, thus more damage, how can we use officers to reflect that? Well, let's have a look.
It's the end of the road for
One
you.
officer that I'm going to bring up in every single one of these artillery videos will actually be War Machine. Not because his coefficiency is high, but because his load time reduction bonuses are so good. Of course, we're getting the standard 10%, which can be trained into other units, and as you can see here, that's exactly what I'm doing. But undoubtedly, you have him awakened, which means he's dealing 1300 coefficiency, and he's getting an additional 10%. Now, considering the Marty artillery piece has a very low loading time, this can be useful when firing at map grids. However, where this officer is a bit of a letdown is literally the skill damage. We're utilizing a very high firepower unit. We have firepower tech, so it might be worth looking at officers that have high firepower and high coefficiency damage. This will then reflect the unit's ability to drop skill damage on an enemy unit or an enemy base, obviously at the cost. But I did want to mention War Machine first, because the load time reduction on artillery is extremely useful. You can be utilized in more than one way. So I recently covered this officer in a officer spotlight. We have 2 lots of damage intensity bonuses. So if we are looking to utilize the maximum amount of damage towards a structure, i.e. an enemy base, we can certainly use this damage intensity bonus. We do miss out on 5% if he isn't on an RL, but 20% is still pretty high. But here's the kicker, is you get an additional 32% when he is hitting a base. Now, he does deal 2000 coefficiency, and then he deals an additional 400 coefficiency when attacking a fortification. And you also get a prep time reduction on officer skills. So we could look towards officer skill reduction, and we could then utilize extremely high damage coefficiency to offset the load time when attacking an enemy fortification. One thing I will say is that he's potentially better as an aide. I know I have him in as a captain at the moment, but he's potentially better as an aide. There's 2 officers that we could pair him with, and this is down to... well, there's 3 officers we could pair him with, but this is now down to what you already have in use. Now, this is where the video I was making got extremely complicated and long, so instead of me explaining to you artillery setups, because that's rapidly what the last video became, I'm going to present to you a couple of options to use this officer with the Martyr, and we'll explain the scenarios behind them. So everyone is going to want Venturer. Everyone's going to want him. His fortification damage is simply too high to ignore. Even a defensive player is going to want him for the flat 2000 coefficiency. So even if you are only using the Martier gun as a defensive unit, 2000 coefficiency with a 1 second reduction in skill time output is absolutely phenomenal. So what we'll do is we'll cover the defensive option first. And that will naturally be Stinger Fist. We have an increase in damage intensity and a damage resistance buff, both of which extremely handy while you're garrisoned inside the base. We also have a reduction in enemy shield capacity, which is extremely useful defensively. But we can also attack multiple ground units, and we're also dealing additional co-efficiency damage here. So we're taking two very damaging officers, and you can see I have them both paired. I don't have them on the Marty gun, but I do have them both paired as a defensive option, because I do think that this is a good combo, both offensively and defensively, because the bonus damage you get in the offense from Venturer is offset by the bonus damage you get from Stinger Fist here in the defense. So it's a good all-rounder option, and it's good for the Marty gun. Now, if you are stuck with the Marty gun, I'm going to have to suggest that this is a good all-rounder for you. That's providing you don't have the next officer. Argent Flame. Now, depending on how many artillery guns you have, this officer is a must. He's a mainstay. He is a certainty. You cannot get anywhere through an artillery line without seeing him in at least one of your lineup. If you've got 2 artillery guns, he needs to be in. If you've got 1 artillery gun, he needs to be in. If you've got 4, he needs to be in. He is the core officer for the artillery troop, and that is because of his tactical ability, which is 1500 damage co-efficiency, but it's a 25% boost to the aid. Now, in terms of attacking an enemy base, you've just given 25% to Venturer on the hardest hitting artillery piece, which is going to have the highest amount of skill damage. So instead of dealing 2000, he's going to deal 2500, and instead of the bonus being 400, it's going to be 100. So that's going to be another 500. So you've now basically got an aid that's producing 3000 damage co-efficiency, which is why I said Venturer is a good aid, and which is why this is probably a good option if you are running a Marty artillery gun. You have Argent Flame on as the captain, dealing 1500, and now when you're attacking an enemy base, you're getting 3000, so that's a total of 4500 between the 2 officers. And more importantly, we do get another damage intensity. However, the caveat is that the damage intensity here with Argent Flame is garrisoned. But the next officer has a trained in ability, which will be damage versus fortifications. So a lot of people will run multiple artillery pieces. And another good officer when you're on the offense, or whether you're on the defense, is Eye of Providence. Now, I was a bit unfair with him in some regards in my video about him, but he's an exceptionally good officer, especially when you're attacking enemy fortifications. And this is the other officer that you probably want leading the Marty artillery troop if you've got Venturer in as the aid. Because we're going to be stacking damage intensity versus fortifications pretty heavily between the two. Both of them have a 32% damage intensity versus fortification once awoken, and increases the officer's skill boost against hostile bases by 40% when leading the artillery troop. So we do get a further increase in skill damage. Officer skill boost here, as you can see, when the damage of an officer skill is being calculated, it will be affected by the attacker's officer skill boost and the defender's officer skill resilience. Officer skills include tactical skills, passive skills, awakening skills, and conquest skills. Officer skill boosts only affect damage from these types of skills. We're getting a 40% boost when attacking the enemy base, and if we have an extremely high damage intensity versus fortifications, as I have explained before, your damage intensity, if it is higher than their damage resistance, your damage intensity overcomes that, and then you can start applying more damage. So it's very difficult for me to say this combo, that combo is good, because ultimately it's down to which artillery piece you're using, which type of damage you're looking for, and also how you wish to apply this damage. Now, this combo that we've just discussed, these 3 officers, or 4 officers rather, quite briefly we've discussed, all rely around the scenario of you attacking an enemy base. In terms of hitting enemy units out in the field using War Machine because of the load time reduction. Very, very handy. It's a very useful skill. It's not particularly good in terms of artillery versus artillery. It is going to give you the edge. It is going to let you get off a shot first, maybe. He's better off on the RL, in my opinion, but he's still pretty good. And the great thing about field play with the Martyr gun and defensive play with the Martyr gun is they're fairly similar. We're looking at dealing damage to units, and as we have a blast damage increase for the map grid, it makes sense. We're also looking at how quickly we can apply the skill damage to that map grid that is being attacked, whether it be tanks or infantry or other artillery.
Close in on the target.
Golden Eagle often gets a mention these days because of the normal attack boost, and also because we are seeing an increase in a lot of people using things like damage resist to try and overcome damage intensity and survive longer. He helps you ignore that, and also in a defensive setup we're also getting a base damage resist buff, so you can stack him with Fist and you're going to have a lot of damage resistance that's applied to the base and a lot of damage intensity and damage resistance ignore stats piling on top of each other pretty quickly. That's really good against things like tanks and counter battery fire when you're shooting at enemy artillery.
Don't feel guilty.
Now, I can't believe I'm going to say this, because notoriously I tell people to stay well clear of this officer. However, if you are using a Martyr artillery piece and you are a base-to-base player and you like to snipe enemy units, her +1 map grid you will be able to utilize to your fullest advantage. Because of the length of time the Martyr gun takes to load and fire, you want to give yourself the best possible chance to pop out, fire off a shot and pop back in. So you could use a combination like War Machine and Champion of the People. That will give you the additional map grid, which can translate into time as they move in range to try and shoot you, and also because of the load time reduction that's available. And remember, we're trying to land shots, not skill damage here. We're not trying to pop off massive hits with coefficiency. The whole point of base-to-basing artillery duels is that you fire a shot and you pop back into your base. You pop out, you fire a shot, you pop back in. And the idea is that you wear down the enemy artillery pieces, or units that are outside your base, you wear them down as well. So that's a pretty good combo in that sort of scenario where you're using your artillery to pop out and snipe units. Obviously, don't use Champion of the People. The damage output is too low, and when it does come to a base defense scenario, which is the next logical step from popping out and sniping units, she's not going to be any use. The map 1 grid the additional +1 map grid that you get is made redundant by the +3 that your base provides. The 1500 damage coefficient is a complete waste. Versatile officers are better than her. Speaking of versatile officers, Lady of Justice. Now, this is solely down to a protracted defensive engagement. In a scenario where you are inside a pre-built village in an L4, you'll be receiving 35% firepower. Okay, so you're defending your base, you might be offline. If you have her awakened, you're also receiving this. Your tactical skill blasts an enemy with the shotgun, dealing damage coefficient of 1500, so that's great, to the enemy ground force troop, reducing the troop speed by 50% for 6 seconds. That's not the bit we're interested in. The bit we're interested in is the following. Also increases the damage intensity and the troop speed of this officer's troop by 15%. Not so much the troop speed, but the damage intensity of 15%. If you're in a defensive scenario, damage intensity is extremely important because you want to overcome the attacking unit's damage resistance. The higher the damage intensity, the more damage gap you get between the resistance and the intensity, the more damage each individual shot from the artillery pieces or from the tanks or from the infantry or from the helicopters will do. So it makes sense that you consider her for an artillery piece that has exceptionally high firepower. Miss Percy does get a look in here because her tactical skill increases the firepower by 8% for all units within the base in a defensive scenario, and I think it's up to 2. Yeah. All your troops within 2 map grids by 8%. So when you're attacking or defending, if you're short on statues, there is a high probability, if you're playing an L4, that she is already awakened. Now, if she is already awakened, that 8% on a Marty gun, that can come in pretty handy. That can come in pretty handy indeed. Now, only as a placeholder for one of the better artillery officers, she's not someone you'd want to keep on there indefinitely, but obviously 8% firepower on something that's already got 1.4, that's going to be a big boost. A big boost. The Marty gun is... I kind of feel like it's something you take if that's the only option you have. The Liberty gun deals 50% more damage to fortifications, although it does have less firepower, which means the skill damage is potentially less. Potentially. We can still train in damage increases for the officers to increase the skill efficiency output, skill coefficient. The Marty gun is probably... It's just a flat artillery piece. Unlike the RL, which excels at wiping out infantry and applying damage to bases, unlike the ATG, which excels at wiping out tanks, MBTs, and aircraft, unlike the Liberty gun, which is arguably king of smashing bases. The Marty gun sits neatly somewhere between all of them. It's okay at hitting tanks and other ground units. It's okay at hitting bases. But it doesn't really excel in either of those. And it's okay out in the field, but because it's such a low slow time for its reload, you know, you can run RLs more efficiently as a field unit. Hell, you could even run ATGs more efficiently as a field unit than what you could run a Marty artillery piece. Now, as always, guys, these are just my thoughts. These are just this is my perspective on how I play Warpath. This is not something you should be taking as the gold standard. I know some people do, and that's fine, and other people disagree with me, and that is also fine. If you have a better way of running the Marty gun, something that I have not thought of, by all means tell me I'm wrong. I will listen. I might argue, I might debate. You know, this game can be played in many different ways as a strategy game. The officer lists keep expanding, and that then also in turn allows us to apply different tactics, different skills, different abilities to a unit to then in turn affect how we play or utilize these units. If I was going to use a Marty artillery piece, I would most certainly be using it defensively, with a strong focus on skill damage. I don't think I would be too concerned about making it a base smasher, so I'd probably keep Venturer off. But I definitely think about other ways I could use this. I don't think if I had the availability of other artillery pieces, I don't think I'd be putting Fist on them. Because if you are using Fist, you want the artillery unit he's on to fire as soon as possible. And the reason for that is this. A preemptive attack. Whenever the officer's troop attacks, it causes the target troop to become vulnerable, reducing the target's shield generated by 25% for 8 seconds, which is why I have him on the RL, because when the RL encounters an SH for the first time in a defensive scenario, this thing is going to pop off and it's going to reduce the SH's shield by 25% before the ATG fires, before the Liberty gun fires, before any of the skill damage is popped off. This has already fired within 2 seconds, and it's already been applied to the enemy SH. And it can be applied once every 8 seconds. So if that SH miraculously lasts longer than 8 seconds from that point onwards, then it gets applied again. So for that reason alone, I wouldn't be considering him on a slow firing artillery piece unless I was stuck, you know, like I had no other choice, it's what I have unlocked, it's that or nothing. Then certainly by all means, but this is not going to be applied far enough in advance for it to be utilized fully by your defense. It's going to be utilized fully by the artillery piece for sure, because it's still going to fire off in 4 seconds, and it's still going to be 4 seconds before the skill damage is applied. So it's still going to land within that gap, but the advantage of having it applied 2 or 3 seconds earlier means that things like the ATG, which will fire first before this, that is going to make a difference. I'd probably put someone like Eagle on there, Golden Eagle, if I wasn't using him on a helicopter or a tank, for example. Definitely I'd be looking at placing War Machine on there. if I had no other awakened officers, then a good combination is War Machine and Percy. You're desperate for a damage output, you're desperate for a utility. You can put these two officers on that gun, you can ignore that gun, you can focus on something else. You can focus on another artillery piece, a tank, infantry, your planes. You've got two awakened officers there. Now, I don't like to say, but my awakened. It's the benefits that you get from both War Machine and Percy that affect everything else, which make those two officers ideal candidates for the Marty gun. We've got 8% firepower bonus to every other unit, and we've got 2,500 coefficiency as a total coming out of the two of them, which is 500 less than the standardized 3,000, which is slowly going up to 3,600 with the increase of the new generation officers having 1,800. But it's a good interim. You can then replace these officers a little bit later down the line. You can make good decisions on other units while you're waiting to get to this artillery piece.
Protecting folks is all part of the
And I
job.
probably would consider Lady of Justice on this artillery piece, just for the bonus firepower, which is going to affect the reload time, and for the damage intensity. Lady of Justice is better served elsewhere, in my opinion, on a light tank or on a helicopter or an MBT, and she's better out in the field by a long shot. But she shouldn't be discounted here. 1,500 damage coefficiency and then the boost to damage intensity. You've also got a critical strike chance that can be factored in here. It's a slow firing gun. If you do get a crit off on it, it is going to hit like an absolute hammer. And that is really good in a defensive scenario, because that means everything in that map grid, whether it's 4 tanks, 5 helicopters, 6 light tanks, whatever it is going to get absolutely pounded in a defensive situation. Out in the field, it's not so great. It's not terrible either, because you are going to get a movement increase through this officer. But I think that's pretty much everything said and done about the Marty artillery piece. It's good at everything, it's amazing at nothing. It's not even a jack of all trades, because, to be perfectly honest, that's just... It's just a mediocre weapon. I don't like it. I know there's going to be people out there who say, Cheddar, I disagree with you. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. I've used it. I don't like it.
I don't like to talk crap.
The rate of fire is too low for my likings. If you want to utilize the God of War, which is the 10% chance on attack to reduce the load time by 40%, then you're going to want to fire more shots. The more shots you fire, the greater the frequency of getting something like that or a critical strike off. And a slow firing weapon just doesn't cut the mustard. For skill damage, a slow firing weapon that has a very high amount of damage, it's exceptionally good. It's second to none. There isn't going to be many artillery pieces in the game that are going to match that. But guys, thanks for sticking around. I'm going to cover these in stages. The next one I will be looking at will be the RL. I will then look at the Liberty howitzer, and then I will look at the ATG. So as always, a link to Discord will be in the description box down below. You're more than welcome to come and join in the degeneracy on my server. Please remember, if you don't donate a pizza to the rules, it will not let you continue, as is the bot. Now, I've put off playing Counter-Strike with my friends all evening because I didn't want to play. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys have had a good day. If you've been sat around with a cup of tea, please drink it. It's probably cold by now. Don't put it in the microwave. Don't do that. Just don't. I've been the Smoking Cheddar and you've been a patient audience.